Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard, where we set out to, well, you know the rest. So I hate to break it to you, but Arthur Dark won't be joining us for this one. In fact, he might not be joining us ever again. He's taking a long dirt nap out in the graveyard, if you catch my drift.
Hey, little Artie. What the hell, man?
Arthur, hey, I thought you were...
Thought I was...
Gee, why are you all covered in dirt?
Oh, I don't know. I was out digging a grave when all of a sudden I felt a whack on the back of my head and everything went black. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in said grave all covered in dirt. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that now, would you, little Artie?
Not a thing.
And what's with the camera? Are you filming?
Listen, bub. You've hosted the last 2 Strange and Unusual Tales videos and done a pretty mediocre job at it. This one is mine. I even made a sweet animated opening and everything for it. You should have seen it.
Oh, well, I'm sorry I missed it. I was too busy being unconscious in a hole in the ground.
Yeah, you look like you could use a break. So, why don't you sit this one out? I got it.
Not a chance, termite bait. But if you're nice, you can be my co-host.
Fine.
Fine, okay. Why don't you go ahead and introduce the episode? I gotta get changed and cleaned up.
I'm Little Artie, and I alone will be your host today as we explore more strange and unusual tales from Hollywood Graveyard.
Hey, Artie, have you seen my tie pin?
Your what?
My skull tie pin, have you seen it?
Nope.
Okay, give me a second.
Hey, Arthur, I got an idea for a short film.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's got a great title, too. It's called A Stab in the Dark.
Oh, Artie, A stab in the dark, huh? All right, here we go. Chapter 1. Sometimes, after someone is laid to rest, the grave is opened again and the dead disturbed. Sometimes the reasons are legitimate, other times, not so much.
Here are some more stories of disturbed slumber.
George Washington is known as the father of the United States. He was the first president and led Patriot forces to victory during the Revolutionary War. After his death in 1799 at age 67, Washington was buried in the family vault here on the grounds of his Mount Vernon estate in Virginia. Some 30 years later, a disgruntled employee broke into the crypt and attempted to steal Washington's skull, but instead absconded with the skull of one of his in-laws. In the aftermath of the theft, Washington's family ordered the construction of a new, more secure crypt. The bodies of George and Martha Washington were moved to this facility in 1831, their original lead coffins placed inside these Pennsylvania marble sarcophagi. From a president to a king, we travel to Leicester, England to share the story of the king under the parking lot. Richard III was King of England from 1483 until his death in 1485. In that year, Richard went to battle against Henry Tudor. Richard was slain, making him the last King of England to die in battle. His body was taken to Leicester and buried without ceremony. For more than 500 years, the location of Richard's grave was unknown, so a memorial stone was placed in the Leicester Cathedral. But in 2012, researchers at the University of Leicester and the Richard III Society began to hone in on the area they believed might be the burial place of Richard III, in a parking lot outside the cathedral, which was the former site of the Greyfriars Priory. On the very first day of the dig in the parking lot, researchers found skeletal remains. There was severe scoliosis of the spine, which Richard III was known to have. And after extensive evaluation of the remains, it was concluded that these were indeed the remains of Richard III. In 2015, his remains were carried in procession to Leicester Cathedral and reinterred here under this new tomb. Theodore Fodor Glava was a pale, lanky loner who lived in Colorado in the early 1900s. After his death and burial here in Lafayette Cemetery, locals noted that on his tombstone it stated he was from Transylvania. This led rise to the rumor that Fodor was in fact a vampire. So the townspeople dug him up, and noting blood around his mouth and long hair and nails, the frightened and superstitious folks drove a stake through poor Fodor's heart and reburied him. Shortly after the reburial, a tree like any other around began to grow up through the grave, it was said, right from the stake buried in his heart. Well, the truth of the matter was that Theodore here was just a poor immigrant who died during the 1918 flu epidemic. Two people sharing one grave. It's not unheard of in the case of families, but what is unheard of is when two perfect strangers share a grave and the families of neither are aware of the fact. Such was the disturbing case of Christina Tournai and Arthur Hurt. Tina was just 23 when she went missing, murdered by her estranged husband, John Sandoval, in 1995. An agonizing 22 years passed before her family learned what became of her. Authorities finally convinced John to lead them to her body. Where he led them was to Sunset Memorial Gardens in Greeley, Colorado, and the grave of a World War II veteran named Arthur Hurt. John told them that after killing his wife, he had snuck into the cemetery under the cover of darkness, found a freshly dug grave, and hid her body in that grave before the funeral of its intended occupant the next day, Mr. Hurt here. For more than 2 decades, the two strangers rested here together, unbeknownst to anyone. The family of Mr. Hurt agreed to allow his casket to be exhumed in the effort to find Tina. The body of Tina was then found buried 2 feet deeper in the same grave, the veteran having stood watch over Tina all those years. After her body was exhumed from Mr. Hurt's grave, she was reburied at Lakeview Cemetery in Windsor, Colorado, finally giving her family closure. In Italy, we visit Parma, which gave the world Parmesan cheese. This is Cimitero della Villetta. In these grounds, we find the tomb of Niccolò Paganini, the virtuosic violin player who sold his soul to the devil, or so it was thought. How else could he have achieved such mythical talent if not through some association with the devil? And the fact that he dressed all in black and had gaunt, elongated features with long hair only added to his diabolical mystique. But the simple fact was he was just a truly gifted musician. In 1840, Paganini fell ill. He refused last rites and sacrament and died a week later at age 57 in France. Having died without last rites and his frequent association with the devil, the church denied his body a Catholic burial and would not allow him to return to Genova, where he was from. His remains were kept in a basement for 4 years before being allowed to return to Italy. But even then, Paganini would find no immediate rest. He was first buried in a cemetery in Parma in 1867. Then in 1893 he was exhumed for a viewing of his body, and then in 1896 finally laid to rest here in this cemetery in Parma, some 56 years after his death. Here on Hollywood Graveyard, we've profiled quite a few famous folks who were originally buried in one grave, then later moved to another, including John Barrymore, who we featured in our first volume of Strange and Unusual Tales. One of the most famous post-mortem relocations in recent years was Judy Garland. The legendary actress and singer, remembered for films like The Wizard of Oz and A Star is Born, died tragically young at age 47. After her death, she was entombed in the Ferncliff Mausoleum in New York. But a half-century later, in 2017, her family decided to have her body exhumed and moved across the country to Hollywood Forever Cemetery. She's entombed in the newly minted Judy Garland Pavilion, now with room to be surrounded by her family, which was not possible in New York. When you visit Judy, if the conditions are just right, sunlight passing through the windows will sometimes cast rainbows on her crypt. Art Tatum was a pianist. Despite being blind in one eye, he would grow to become one of the greatest jazz pianists of all time, renowned for his virtuosic technique. One of the tunes he's known for is alluded to right here on his crypt, George Gershwin's Someone to Watch Over Me. After his death at age 47, Art was originally interred at Angelus Rosedale Cemetery. But more than 30 years later, Art was exhumed and moved to the Great Mausoleum in Glendale so he could be entombed alongside his wife. His original marker can still be seen at Angelus Rosedale. Gisela Gotten-Sprigg was known to movie audiences as June Marlowe. Her career began in the silent era, and she's remembered to this day for her role as Miss Crabtree in the R-Gang comedies in the 30s. After her death in 1984, she was originally buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery in Mission Hills. But years later, she was exhumed and re-entombed in the mausoleum of the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in downtown Los Angeles, her crypt right near the resurrection window. This is the Court of the Psalms at Mount Sinai Cemetery in Los Angeles. Once upon a time, this crypt hosted a famous songwriter named Mac David. He's particularly remembered as a lyricist, co-writing songs for movies and TV like The Hanging Tree, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, The Ballad of Cat Ballou, Bippity Boppity Boo for Cinderella,
It'll do magic, believe it or not, Bippity Boppity Boo,
and the theme for Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Casper, the friendly ghost, the friendliest ghost you know.
Mac is also remembered for penning the English lyrics to La Vie en Rose. Over his career, he'd penned more than 1,000 songs and earned 8 Oscar nominations along the way. He died in 1993 and was originally entombed at Mount Sinai, but more than a decade later, after the death of his wife, Mac was moved to the Garden of Eden mausoleums at Forest Lawn in Cathedral City, California. His epitaph, "It was the best time," is a lyric from his song, "It Was a Good Time." Gary Cooper ranks among the greatest actors of the 20th century, having twice won an Academy Award for films like High Noon. Gary died in 1961 and was originally laid to rest at this spot near the western end of the grotto section of Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California. 13 years later, his body was exhumed and relocated to Sacred Hearts Cemetery in Southampton, New York. This was motivated by his family's relocation to New York, so they could be close to him. Curiously, his original marker sold at auction in 2015. Lucille Ball was the queen of television comedy in the 50s and 60s, with her landmark sitcom I Love Lucy, as well as subsequent shows like The Lucy Show and Here's Lucy. Time magazine would rank her one of the most influential women of the 20th century. Lucy died in 1989 at age 77. She was cremated, and her ashes were originally inurned in this niche in the columbarium of the Radiant Dawn at Forest Lawn, Hollywood, next to her mother. In 2002, Lucy's family had her and her mother's remains transferred back to her hometown of Jamestown, New York, in Lakeview Cemetery. Her marker features a heart inscription reminiscent of the I Love Lucy titles.
You know, when someone famous dies, there tends to be a rush of interest and speculation from fans about how and where they'll be laid to rest.
Yep, and they're usually wrong.
Often yes, but not always. And rarely, ever so rarely, we already know and can visit the graves of famous folks while they're still alive. This next chapter features future grave sites, with the disclaimer that since these folks are still alive as of filming, these sites aren't necessarily, if you'll forgive the pun, set in stone.
Oh my God. He'll be here all evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, unless I have any say in the matter.
If you're strolling through Mount Hebron Cemetery in Flushing, New York, you may happen upon this beautiful Art Deco mausoleum with a very familiar name on it. This is the Streisand Mausoleum, wherein rests Diana Streisand, the mother of Barbra Streisand. Barbra is one of the entertainment world's biggest stars, a singer, actress, filmmaker, and more. One of the few performers to have won an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony, the EGOT. It is believed that after her death, Barbra will be entombed here alongside her mother. The graves lining the southern street of Westwood Village Memorial Park are something of a walk of fame of the dead. Kirk Douglas, Farrah Fawcett, Walter Matthau, etc. Here among them is the grave of Irwin Winkler and his wife Margot. Irwin is a noted producer whose films include Rocky, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas. His wife Margot is an actress. As of filming, both are still alive. We're in Montreal now, in Cimetière Notre-Dame-des-Neiges. Here lies René Angelil. He was a singer, music producer, and talent manager. In the 80s, he became manager of talented singer Celine Dion. Years later, they would marry, remaining together until his death from cancer at age 73. He was laid to rest here, and it is believed that one day Celine Dion will also be laid to rest here alongside her husband. In New York's beautiful Kensico Cemetery, we find the De Niro family plot. This is where a noted artist named Robert De Niro is laid to rest. No, not that Robert De Niro, he's still alive. This is the grave of his father, Robert De Niro Sr., and also his mother. Their son, Robert De Niro, ranks among the greatest actors of his generation, and it is presumed that someday he too will be laid to rest here with his family. Robert De Niro was a frequent collaborator of renowned film director Martin Scorsese. That brings us to Moravian Cemetery, also in New York. In the northern end of the cemetery, we find the Scorsese family mausoleum. Martin Scorsese is particularly known for gangster and crime films like Goodfellas, Gangs of New York, Taxi Driver, and The Departed, as well as dramas like Hugo and Killers of the Flower Moon. In this mausoleum rest Martin's parents, brother, and sister-in-law, and someday, when the film world mourns the loss of one of its most visionary filmmakers, Martin Scorsese will be laid to rest here, too. Nicolas Cage is as famous for his real-life eccentricities as he is for his movies. And New Orleans is famous for its magnificent cemeteries and unique history and folklore. It somehow feels right, then, that the future tomb of Nicolas Cage is found here at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, and that it's a giant pyramid. He bought the tomb for himself back in 2010, and has since been spotted even visiting his own future grave. The Latin inscription here on the facade means, "Everything from one." Woodlawn Cemetery in Nashville is home to numerous legends of country music, like George Jones and Tammy Wynette. Well, someday they'll be joined by one of the all-time greats. In 2025, Dolly Parton lost her beloved husband of nearly 60 years, Carl Dean. He was entombed here in the mausoleum at Woodlawn. This beautiful crypt facade is a loving tribute to an enduring relationship. Upon installation, Dolly's name and an image of her childhood home were engraved into the crypt facade in anticipation. Though we love Dolly and hope she stays with us for a good long time before reuniting with her husband. At Hollywood Forever Cemetery, if you wander a few spaces south of Vampira's grave, you'll find the future grave of Fred Armisen. Fred is, of course, still alive as of filming. The funny man and musician is known for his tenure on Saturday Night Live and for co-creating and co-starring in Portlandia. And more recently, he's played Uncle Fester in the Netflix series Wednesday. His future grave currently features just a placeholder marker, but I'm sure when the time comes, Fred has something pretty special in store for his eternal home here. For decades, fans of The Price is Right could visit the grave of its lovable host, Bob Barker, while he was still alive. It's located here at Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills. After his wife died in 1981, Bob purchased the adjacent plot for himself and had it marked without the death date inscribed. After Bob passed in 2023 at age 99 and was laid to rest here, the years-old marker was finally updated to reflect his death year.
Hey, Arthur. Sorry I tried to murder you earlier. As a peace offering, I've made your favorite drink. A corpse reviver.
Oh. Thank you, Artie. It's very big of you.
Is that a disparaging reference to my size?
Hey, you know, that's pretty good.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah, but you know, there's something different. It's got like a bite, an intense kind of aftertaste. What is that?
Something kind of poisony?
No. It's like, is it the absinthe? Anyway, while I continue to enjoy this cocktail that Artie made for me, why don't you enjoy some more of those unique and unusual monuments, grave markers, and epitaphs?
What's this curious sight?
It's a chessboard.
Ron Weasley's right. It is a chessboard. Or a checkers board. For anyone who may want to have a sit down and play a game alongside the dead. Or perhaps against them. If you're not good at chess, like little Artie here,
Hey,
maybe a card game is more your preferred evening family activity. That certainly was the case for the Harris family. Peek into their mausoleum and you'll catch a glimpse of them playing cards for eternity. Are you a big fan of SpongeBob SquarePants?
The cemetery. Maybe I'll just live the rest of my life here.
Are you a make SpongeBob SquarePants your tombstone level of fan? No? Well, Kimberly Walker was. Does that mean it's empty? Arthur Death. Now that is a cool name. Sometimes we get a glimpse of someone's vocation from their grave, like pianist Charles Segal. Will Deal was a flight instructor for the German Air Force, so his grave here in Frankfurt features an airplane propeller. Bruce Berman was an artist and special effects animator. Before his death, he designed his own tombstone, which features 3D scans of his own face and hands. His website is also featured on his stone. I'll bet you can guess what Walter Lindrum was famous for. Want your palm read? Visit Rita Kaslov's grave at Westwood Village, and be sure to bring $5. Take note, kids. Veronica Guerin was a journalist whose tombstone features a newspaper article on which her own murder is the headline. Sometimes people just want to make us, the living, smile or laugh, even in the face of death. Sometimes your traditional grave sayings and imagery just don't match the personality of the deceased. They need to imbue their own unique and unconventional personality into their grave. Like UK substrummer Rab Fallon, the bad grandpa giving the world the bird for eternity. Or take Mr. Owens here, who cheekily snuck a message into his epitaph with the traditional use of an acrostic poem, in which the first letter of each line spells out a word, phrase, or name. I'll let you figure out that one on your own. Derek Fenley imbued quite a bit of his personality into his marker. In the age of YouTube, a little self-promotion from beyond the grave is not unheard of either. Not an unreasonable request from musician Mark Lanegan. This niche at Hollywood Forever contains a note from its occupant, inviting visitors to kiss their glass. Roger Corman's brother. Mr. Minikakis is not dead yet. His future tomb here is colloquially called the Vampire Tomb. But there is intention behind the death date he chose for himself, 666. Here's an impressive example of a post-mortem family reunion. The Davis Monument, featuring sculptures of multiple family members interred therein. Some have fared better than others. According to Gert Onken Stone in Germany, he was born on February 30th, 1648, which is, of course, impossible because there was no February 30th. Does that mean the poor guy never got to celebrate a birthday? This is the grave of the stillborn son of musician Tiny Tim and his wife, who they simply named It. Grave markers can also be a wonderful form of artistic expression. Ferdinand Cheval was a French mail carrier who dreamed of building his own palace. And so he did, working on his dream place for more than 30 years, from stones he collected. It became an iconic work of naive art architecture. After completing his palace, he dreamed of spending eternity there after his death. But he was not allowed to be buried there. So he continued his labors and designed and built his own tomb in the style of his palace, in miniature. Tombstones are usually made out of, well, stone. But one of the most unique materials I've ever seen used for a marker can be found at the grave of filmmaker Stacy Title at Hollywood Forever. This striking headstone is made out of a sort of strawberry amber resin, translucent, almost like glass. It reflects and refracts the light in visually stunning ways throughout the day. Another unique medium for a tombstone, a mosaic. This haunting figure is called Eternal Silence, also known as the Statue of Death, found at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. A couple Chicago cemeteries feature similarly haunting grave markers like these, Girls in Glass. One of Graceland Cemetery's most famous occupants is a young girl named Inez Briggs, sometimes called Inez Clark, featuring a statue of Inez in a glass case. The statues are placed in these glass cases to preserve them from the elements and from vandalism. An apocryphal legend claims the girl died being struck by lightning, and during lightning storms here in the cemetery, her statue is said to disappear from the glass case for fear of the storm. A similar sight can be found a few miles away at Rose Hill Cemetery, a ghostly monument by the same artist who created Inez's statue. Here lies Lulu Fellows, who was 16 when she died from typhoid fever. Her epitaph reads, "Many hopes lie buried here." Our last unique grave monuments come to us today courtesy of our friend Noel in England. In St. Mary Magdalene Churchyard, we find the Bedouin tent tomb of Sir Richard Burton. No, not the actor, the explorer, famed for his explorations of Asia, Africa, and South America. The tent tomb was designed by his wife. What's most curious about this tomb is if you circle around back and ascend a ladder, you can peek the coffins of Sir Richard and Isabel through a window in the tomb. In the graveyard of St. John the Baptist in Pinner, we find what is known as the floating coffin. It's the grave of William and Agnes Loudon. The towering pyramid features a coffin floating in and passing right through the middle of the edifice. But the stone coffin is purely artifice. The Loudons are not floating above us, they are buried under the monument. Lastly, let's head to Joseph Grimaldi Park. Joseph Grimaldi was an entertainer and pantomime clown, one of the most popular of the Regency era in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. After his death in 1837, he was buried at this spot in what was at that time St. James's Churchyard, now the Joseph Grimaldi Park. In 2010, the park underwent refurbishment to increase public interest. Near Joseph's grave, 2 coffin-shaped installations made up of bronze floor tiles were placed, which play a tune when walked upon. The tune is Hot Codlins, a song Grimaldi popularized. They're a little rough after 15 years, but do still play.
What? How are you still alive? I put enough poison in that cocktail to kill a horse.
I'm not a horse, dude. What you doing?
Just carving your tombstone for when I finally succeed in getting rid of you and taking over your show. Call it Murderous Manifestation written in stone.
That's cute. You spelled my name wrong, by the way.
What? No!
The gravestone already carved for me isn't real, just like many of the graves you see on screen. We explore now the history of fictional graves in film and television. These graves, which are made as movie props or as nods to fictional characters, usually don't stick around long. But sometimes they do, and you can visit them. Here at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia, in fact, you can find graves to 2 famous fictional characters who called Philadelphia home. They were siblings in one of the most successful sports movie franchises in history, the Rocky franchise. We first met Adrian Penino, played by actress Talia Shire, in the original Rocky film in 1976. She was Rocky's love interest and inspiration, and the subject of one of the movie's most famous lines. Adrian appeared in the Rocky sequels until it was revealed in Rocky Balboa that Adrian had died from cancer. In the opening scenes of the movie, Rocky's Sylvester Stallone visits Adrian's grave. After filming, the stone was kept here in the cemetery, but moved to this outer location where fans could visit. Next to Adrian is the fictional grave of her brother, Paulie Panino, played by Burt Young. Paulie was Rocky's friend and later became his brother-in-law when he married Adrian. Paulie would appear in the first 6 movies until Creed, when it's revealed that Paulie died. And just as he did for Adrian, Rocky visits his grave in the movie. After filming, his prop grave was also kept here for fans to be able to visit. As for Burt Young, who played Paulie, he rests at Mount St. Mary Cemetery in Flushing, New York. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol has been adapted countless times on stage, screen, in music, and more. For my money, the best film adaptation is the 1984 TV movie starring George C. Scott, whose commanding presence and gruff, imposing character made him perfect for the role of Scrooge. When filmmakers were shooting the scene in the graveyard where Scrooge discovers his own grave, they found an actual tombstone that had worn beyond legibility and asked to use it and inscribe Ebenezer Scrooge thereon. After filming, the grave remained as it was and became a popular tourist attraction until it was destroyed by vandals in 2024. You fans of the long-running primetime soap opera Dallas likely recognize this as the iconic South Fork Ranch, where the show took place. Here on the grounds of the ranch is a small, fictional cemetery with graves of a few of the show's characters. J.R. Ewing, played by Larry Hagman, was one of the show's central characters, appearing in all 357 episodes of the original series. The cliffhanger episode in 1980 when J.R. was shot became one of the great cultural moments in television history. After the man who played J.R., Larry Hagman, passed away, his ashes were scattered here over South Fork Ranch. Eleanor Miss Ellie Ewing, played by Barbara Bel Geddes, was matriarch of the family, and Jock Ewing, played by Jim Davis, was the patriarch of the family. The very first original Netflix series was 2013's House of Cards, about a ruthless politician named Frank Underwood, played by Kevin Spacey. In season 6, audiences learned of Frank Underwood's death through a glimpse of his tombstone.
I'll tell you this, though, Francis. When they bury me, it won't be in my backyard. And when they pay their respects, they'll have to wait in line.
That prop tombstone used in the series can be visited today at Oakland Cemetery in South Carolina. Albuquerque, New Mexico became famous in 2008 as the backdrop of the hit series Breaking Bad. In the final episode of the series in 2013, spoiler alert, Walter White dies. As a nod to this, a mock funeral was held shortly after the finale for the fictional Walter White at Sunset Memorial Park Cemetery in Albuquerque. During the ceremony, an actual headstone to Walter White was placed. But families of the deceased in the cemetery started to complain about the fictional grave, so the headstone was removed and now hangs in a strip mall outside of Vernon's Speakeasy in Albuquerque. If you're a fan of Harry Potter, this next one might make you a little misty-eyed. One of the most beloved characters of the series was a house elf named Dobby, who was set free by Harry Potter. In Deathly Hallows, Dobby is killed by Bellatrix Lestrange in one of the most emotionally heart-rending moments in the series. He's buried at Shell Cottage beneath a headstone bearing the epitaph, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." That funeral scene was shot here on the sands of Freshwater West in Wales. To this day, fans leave offerings like socks or painted rocks here for the beloved elf's fictional grave.
I wear my sunglasses indoors so people think I'm cool.
Hey, it's your move.
Yeah. I don't know how you do it.
Do what, beat you at chess every time?
You wish. No, I mean wear your sunglasses indoors, without bumping into walls or falling down the stairs. I can't see a damn thing.
Well, then take them off. No one's forcing you. Oh, damn. Look at those baby blues. You know, they say the eyes are the window into the soul.
Oh, yeah? Well, what do you see in there?
My own reflection.
How very droll, Arthur.
Well, if you're not too busy losing this game of chess, would you like to introduce the next chapter?
Oh yeah, we're still doing that, aren't we? Whoever said you can't take it with you never met these next folks who are buried with some curious items. Like their favorite chess piece. Yep. Arthur, when you die, what will you be buried with?
You. Checkmate.
Uh-oh.
Legendary crooner and actor Frank Sinatra is laid to rest in Desert Memorial Park in Cathedral City. He was buried with a flask of Jack Daniel's whiskey, some cigarettes and a lighter, and a roll of dimes. Frank Sinatra always carried a roll of dimes with him so he could be sure to use the payphone if he ever needed to. This stemmed from the kidnapping of his son, Frank Jr. Tiny Tim was one of the most unique and colorful musicians of his day, known for his distinctive falsetto singing, with wide vibrato, accompanied by a ukulele. His best known tune was Tiptoe Through the Tulips. At his funeral, tulips and a ukulele were placed with him in the coffin before entombment here at Lakewood Cemetery in Minnesota. Bela Lugosi is famous for his portrayal as Count Dracula in the pioneering 1931 Universal horror film. He helped define what we think of today as the vampire in popular culture. After his death at age 73, Lugosi was buried here at Holy Cross Cemetery, wearing his Dracula cape. Frank Inn was one of Hollywood's most famous animal actor trainers and handlers. His star animals include Benji, Orangey the cat from Breakfast at Tiffany's, and Arnold the pig from Green Acres. After his death, Frank Inn was buried here at Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills. He was buried with the cremated remains of many of his beloved animal stars. Leonard Bernstein was one of the 20th century's great conductors and composers, resting here at Greenwood Cemetery in New York. It's said he never went anywhere without a copy of Alice in Wonderland, and that includes To the Grave. He was reportedly buried with a copy of the beloved book, as well as a conductor's baton and a lucky penny. Roald Dahl wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, so it may come as no surprise to you to learn that the author was buried with some chocolate, here at St. Peter and St. Paul Churchyard in England. Other items he was buried with include snooker cues and some pencils, so perhaps he can keep writing more memorable stories. Harry Houdini is a name that has become synonymous with magic, illusion, and escape acts. His mother wrote to him regularly when he was touring, and Houdini kept these letters. Before his death, he requested that those letters be formed into a pillow for his head in his coffin, and so they were. Houdini was also buried in an airtight bronze coffin used for an escape act. This time, though, we can be fairly certain he didn't escape. Humphrey Bogart was Hollywood's favorite hard-boiled leading man, one of the greatest stars in movie history. After his death, he was cremated, his ashes inurned here at Forest Lawn, Glendale. Before sealing the niche, his wife Lauren Bacall placed a small gold whistle with the inscription, "If you want anything, just whistle," which is an allusion to one of their most famous scenes together from the film To Have and Have Not.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
George Burns was a famous funny man on radio, film, and television for close to a century. The gravel-voiced comedian who rests here with his partner in entertainment, Gracie Allen, always had a cigar in tow. On any given day, he smoked an estimated 10 to 15 cigars. So, naturally, when George was entombed here in the Freedom Mausoleum at Forest Lawn, Glendale, he was entombed with some of his favorite cigars. So when you visit George, don't be surprised if you see a little smoke coming from the cracks in his crypt. Hollywood icon Tony Curtis didn't leave much room to spare in his coffin when he was buried here at Palm Memorial in Las Vegas. He took with him letters, photographs, his grandson's baby shoes, coins, watches, a DVD, his iPhone, his dog's ashes, art supplies, a Stetson hat, and a whole lot more. Ronnie Van Zant made Sweet Home Alabama famous with his fellow bandmates in Lynyrd Skynyrd. Tragically, he and a few of these bandmates died in a plane crash in 1977. He was just 29. After his burial, his grave was disturbed by grave robbers, then his remains were removed twice. But hopefully, finally, he can rest in peace here at Riverside Memorial Park and find a little relaxation fishing in this pond he's buried next to, because Ronnie was buried with his fishing pole. David Keim loved Burger King burgers, so much so that not even his doctor's admonition to cut back could keep him from this simple pleasure. After his death at age 88, while transporting his body to the cemetery, the entire funeral procession passed through a Burger King drive-thru to pick up 40 Burger King burgers the family had ordered, one of which was placed on his coffin before burial. If you're still hungry after Burger King, perhaps some potato chips would hit the spot. At Arlington Memorial Gardens in Ohio, it's not uncommon to see a grave with a can of Pringles on it. The popular salty snack carved a distinct niche in the markets by distributing their chips in a tall can rather than a bag. The man who designed the Pringles container was named Frederick J. Bauer. He was so proud of having designed the Pringles can, not only was he buried with one, he asked to be buried in one. A portion of his ashes was placed in a Pringles can before being interred here. David Brenner was a comedian whose final request was to have $100 in small bills tucked in his sock, just in case tipping is recommended where he was going. Reuben John Smith dreaded the idea of being buried under 6 feet of earth. So his instructions were, after his death, to be entombed seated comfortably in his favorite chair, a leather recliner. And so he was. Behind these stone walls in Mount Prospect Cemetery in Massachusetts, you can just imagine Reuben John Smith sitting comfortably in his favorite chair for all eternity, a checkerboard on his lap, dressed in his hat and warm coat, the key to the tomb in his pocket. Harry Flamburus loved his motorcycle and was a member of Hell's Angels. He was murdered at age 37, and after his death was buried here at Cypress Lawn in Colma, California. Months later, a contingent of Hell's Angels turned up here at the grave of the man known as Harry the Horse. Harry's bike was a special kind of bike, and months after Harry was buried here, a funeral was held for his bike. Harry's grave was opened, his bike disassembled, and placed in the grave on top of his coffin. Richard Burton was one of the stage and screen's most formidable actors, particularly noted for his work in Shakespearean roles and performing alongside his wife Elizabeth Taylor. Richard was born in Wales, and after his death at the age of 58, he was buried with a book of poetry by fellow Welshman Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. If you've been to Hollywood Forever Cemetery, you've surely seen this eye-catching tomb of Pete Stanley, the Piano Man, featuring a small marble piano. Behind the piano is a space specifically created for his wife, who is still alive as of filming. A fashion designer and enthusiast, she had a closet tomb created for her clothes, so that upon her death she can take all her favorite fashion pieces with her to the grave. They'll be hung neatly here in her closet next to the sarcophagus. The closet tomb already has the hanging rod installed and ready to go, so she can be fashionably adorned in eternity, when the time comes.
What's the most unusual place you've ever heard of someone having their remains placed?
I heard Rod Stewart had his mentor's ashes placed in his guitar.
Oh, that is unusual.
And you know the song Monster Mash?
He did the Monster Mash.
The Monster Mash.
It was a graveyard smash.
Yeah, that's the one. The guy who wrote that, Bobby Pickett, his cremated remains were made into a diamond ring worn by his daughter.
I heard Coolio did something similar. What about in the ink of a comic book? This comic book, to be precise.
What do you mean?
It says right here, Mark, the author's last wish was to be cremated and for his ashes to be mixed with the printer's ink during the printing process of this book. Yes, the pages you are about to read contain actual particles of the groove.
No way. Dude, that book's gotta be haunted.
Nah. But it does go to show that not everyone ends up in a cemetery. You never know where you'll stumble onto a final resting place.
For instance, if you're enjoying an afternoon stroll along a quiet neighborhood street in Vienna, Virginia, you may be surprised to see a few graves surrounded by a small brick wall in what looks like someone's front yard near a street corner. This is a Broadwater family cemetery, where Revolutionary War veteran Charles Broadwater and his family are laid to rest. This was the site of his Springfield Manor house and plantation. They were buried here on their land in the 19th century, but as the town and neighborhood grew around it over the years, this tiny cemetery remained in place, now in someone's front yard near a street corner. Or maybe you're headed out for a movie night to catch the latest blockbuster on the big screen. If the AMC in New Brunswick, New Jersey is your theater of choice, stop over to say hello to Mary Ellis and a few of her relatives. Their grave is found right here in the parking lot of the theater. Mary Ellis was a suffragette who lived on this land overlooking the Raritan River and was buried here after her death. Their graves remained here in place as the community developed around them. In previous volumes of our Strange and Unusual Tales, we've featured individuals who have had portions of their remains launched into space. Well, last year saw another significant event from this final frontier. On January 8th, 2024, Celestis Memorial Space Flights launched the appropriately named Enterprise mission flight.
And liftoff of the first United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket, launching a new era in spaceflight to the moon and beyond.
The footage you see here is the actual launch of the Enterprise mission. Why was the name Enterprise so fitting? Because aboard that flight were portions of cremated remains from Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek creator, his wife Majel Barrett, who played Nurse Chapel, Lwaxana Troi, and voiced the computer on Star Trek, DeForest Kelley, who played Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy, James Doohan, who played Chief Engineer Scotty, and Nichelle Nichols, remembered for her groundbreaking role as Communications Officer Uhura on Star Trek, one of the very first black women featured in a prominent role on a major television series. Together, this legendary crew makes their final journey into the final frontier. And unlike previous launches of cremated remains, which orbited Earth briefly before either returning to Earth or burning up in the atmosphere, this mission will carry them into interplanetary deep space in a never-ending journey through the cosmos. Back down to Earth, Arnold Palmer is considered one of the greatest golfers of all time, winning numerous events on the PGA Tour for decades, and popularizing the sport from the early days of television. After his death in 2016, he was cremated, his ashes scattered at his hometown golf club, Latrobe Country Club, where he learned to play golf. Arnold Palmer isn't the only celebrity to have their ashes scattered on a golf course. Harpo Marx, one of the famous Marx Brothers comedy troupe, had his ashes scattered into the sand trap at the 7th hole of the Rancho Mirage Golf Course in California. Miss Baker was a monkey astronaut, a monkey knot, if you will. In 1959, she became the first animal to be launched into space by the US to survive the mission. After the flight, she became something of a national celebrity, greeting and entertaining museum guests at the US Space and Rocket Museum here in Huntsville, Alabama. After her death in 1984, Miss Baker was buried here on the grounds of the US Space and Rocket Center, her grave marked by this tombstone, where visitors often leave offerings in the form of bananas. Ted Williams was a professional baseball player and manager, playing his entire 19-year career with the Boston Red Sox. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. Ted died from heart failure at age 83 in 2002. It was his wish to be cremated. However, his family instead opted to have his remains frozen cryogenically here at the Alcor facility in Arizona, to be put into biostasis for the possibility of future resurrection. For our last stop off the beaten path, let's head to Troldhaugen in Bergen, a beautiful panorama overlooking a fjord in Norway. Entombed in this cliffside cave is Edvard Grieg. Even if you don't know his name, I promise you've heard his music. His best-known work is the Peer Gynt Suite, written as incidental music for Henrik Ibsen's 1867 play, Peer Gynt. It contains those instantly recognizable pieces, Morning Mood, Anitra's Dance, and In the Hall of the Mountain King. After his death at age 64, a funeral march he composed was played at his funeral. He was cremated, his urn and ashes placed here in this mountain crypt, later to be joined by his wife. Grieg now rests in the Hall of the Mountain King.
Damn it, Arthur!
A little skittish tonight, aren't we, Artie? Well, maybe you're not cut out for this next chapter then, where we get up close and personal with the dead, breaking down the barriers physical and metaphysical that separate us from them. Does that make you nervous?
No.
Have you ever had an up-close and personal encounter with the dead?
Well, there was this one time, late at night, when restlessness kept me from much-needed slumber. There, in the dark, I saw a figure. Gaunt, skeletal, and ghostly white. I was sure I was looking at some phantom from the spirit realm. The sight of it made me shudder. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I realized it was just you stumbling to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still, it was a horrific sight.
Okay.
Horrific, I tells ya.
Are you finished?
Roll the tape.
In October 2023, a vintage hearse rolled through the streets of Reading, Pennsylvania, carrying the body of a man who died in 1895. His 128-year journey from the funeral home to the grave is a rather curious one, but not unheard of for the time. The unidentified man was picked up while drunkenly walking the streets in October of 1895, and later for burglarizing a house. He died in the county prison on November 19th. Having used a fake name, no next of kin could be found, and his body was released to a local funeral home, which at that time was experimenting with new techniques of embalming. The man was embalmed, but burial was delayed in attempts to find out who this man was. He came to be known as Stone Man Willie. Stone Man because the embalming process used on him had essentially mummified him, hard as stone, and Willie as a fake name he had used. Stone Man Willie's mummy was put on display in the funeral home for decades, where he became something of a celebrity. It would be a rite of passage for locals to visit the Reading mummy. But after more than a century, locals decided he'd been gawked at enough. The funeral home worked with historians to reveal his true identity to be James Murphy, before giving him a proper final send-off and burial here in Forest Hills Memorial Park. A similar story can be found here in Kentucky at Maple Lawn Park Cemetery. Meet Speedy Atkins. As his epitaph reads, he lived 53 years as a pauper, was embalmed by A.Z. Hammock, buried 66 years later in 1994 as a celebrity. After Atkins died in poverty, his body was turned over to his friend A.Z. Hammock, the only African-American undertaker in town. His body was preserved with an experimental process and occasionally displayed at the funeral home. After Hammock died, his wife took custody of Atkins' body, keeping it for another 45 years, during which time the mummified corpse became a local celebrity. In 1937, a massive flood washed Atkins' body away, but he was later found, recognized, and returned to the funeral home. The story would be featured on shows like Ripley's Believe It or Not. This is Dunfermline Abbey in Fife, Scotland, and the shrine of St. Margaret of Scotland. The English princess and Scottish queen was sometimes called the Pearl of Scotland. She married King Malcolm III of Scotland, making her queen in 1070. Margaret was incredibly pious in her faith and dedicated herself to charitable causes, serving orphans and the poor. She died around the age of 48 from apparent grief from the death of her husband and son. St. Margaret was laid to rest here at Dunfermline, but was later exhumed, and her head was removed to Edinburgh Castle. Margaret's head was kept as a relic by Mary Queen of Scots, apparently to assist her in childbirth and bring her good luck. Her head then made its way to France and was later lost during the French Revolution. If you've been to Europe, you know our friends across the pond are far less squeamish about getting up close and personal with Mr. Death than we are here in the States. This is Sedlec Ossuary, outside of Prague, also known as the Bone Church. The appellation is no exaggeration. Even before entering the chapel, you're greeted by real human bones, artistically and ornately arranged on walls and in sconces. Upon entering the chapel, do your best to keep your jaw from dropping to the floor at the macabre sight that welcomes you. Bones, tens of thousands of them, the skeletons of an estimated 40 to 70,000 people, artistically arranged across every inch of the room. Skulls strung along the ceiling like so much Christmas garland. Archways, vases, coat of arms, crucifixes, chandeliers, anything and everything made from real human bones. The crown jewel, the magnificent central chandelier, contains at least one of every bone in the human body. Bones from mass graves had been kept in this ossuary from around the 14th century. In 1870, František Rint, a local woodcarver, was hired to put the bone heaps into more aesthetically pleasing order, yielding this wonderfully macabre result. After completing his work, the artist signed his name, not in paint, but in bone, naturally. A similar sight can be found in Rome at the Capuchin Crypt. It's sort of a little brother of the catacombs of the Cappuccini monks in Palermo, which we visited in our last Strange and Unusual video. This crypt in Rome is slightly different in that the emphasis is more on the artistic arrangement of bones rather than mummies. However, you can find a few fully dressed mummies of the monks here too. The Capuchin Crypt is a series of small rooms located beneath the Church of Santa Maria della Concezione dei Cappuccini. It contains the skeletal remains of close to 4,000 individuals, mainly Capuchin friars. Displays like these are not meant to be macabre, but serve as both a silent reminder of the swift passage of life on Earth and of mortality, but also serve as a solution to the practical limitations of burial space. The crypt grew in fame through literary references by the likes of Mark Twain and Nathaniel Hawthorne. While we're in Italy, let's head south to Naples. Here we find a humble church called the Church of Santa Luciella. As the welcome sign reads, we descend into the ancient cemetery to behold the skull with ears. A skull with ears? What could that possibly mean? Well, let's find out. Beneath the church is the hypogeum, the burial chamber. Here in these alcoves, the dead were placed on the soil and allowed to decompose. The bones were then collected and kept in the lower ossuary, but the skulls, those were placed on the cornice. The process was a way of supporting the soul's journey to the afterlife. Because the skull was considered the seat of the soul, local Neapolitan women would clean and maintain the skulls, praying to them and asking for their graces. The offerings you see here are symbols of gratitude for granted requests. One skull in particular here was prayed to more often than others for its perceived ability to listen better. That's because this skull has ears. Well, not really ears, but bony detachments caused by the humidity of the crypt. But due to their striking resemblance to ears, local women assumed that this skull could hear better, and was a more effective conduit to bring their pleas to the spirit world. They therefore were known to speak and pray directly into the skull's ears. Our communions with the dead aren't always physical. Sometimes they're more spiritual in nature. On March 3, 1888, an Italian-born British actor named Frederick Baker, known as Federici, suffered a heart attack and died during his final exit while playing Mephistopheles in the opera Faust. The actor and singer was laid to rest here in Melbourne General Cemetery in Australia. His body may be here, but if there is any truth to the local legend, his spirit stayed behind at the theater. Federici's ghost, in full evening dress, has reportedly been spotted at the Princess Theatre in Melbourne, where he died. Now every opening night at the theatre, a seat in the dress circle is left empty for Federici. It's a sign of good luck if his ghost appears. Deep in the quiet halls of the Great Mausoleum in Glendale, we reach the corridor of vistas in the Dahlia Terrace. This is the niche and ornate bronze urn of Lucille Rickson. She was one of Hollywood's very first child stars during the silent era. She's remembered as Alice in the Edgar Pomeroy series of short films, and she would star alongside some of the silent era's biggest stars in films like Human Wreckage and The Painted Lady. But overwork and exhaustion took their toll on the young starlet, who tragically died from tuberculosis at just 14. Nearly a century later, in 2013, a program would air titled The Ghost Inside My Child. In it, a young girl named Amy claimed to be the reincarnation of Lucille Rickson. At the end of the documentary, to get closure, Amy and her mother travel here to visit the grave of Lucille. If she really was the reincarnation of Lucille, then she was visiting her own grave. The tomb of Marie Laveau is the most visited here in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, and that's because visitors hope to perhaps glean something more than just a photo op with New Orleans' voodoo queen. An old tradition states that if you draw 3 X's on the tomb, turn around 3 times, knock on the tomb, and call out your wish, Laveau may just grant it for you. If she does, you are to return and circle your X and leave an offering for Marie Laveau. But because of this continued vandalism of the tomb, the cemetery is now only accessible on a guided tour.
Oh, Marie Laveau, voodoo priestess, grant me my wish and rid me of this pesky Arthur, so I can be permanent host of Hollywood Graveyard.
It doesn't work on a picture of her tomb, dummy. You have to actually be there.
Hey, it never hurts to try.
Pretty impressive, though, that thing you can do with your head, making it go all the way around like that.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
Like The Exorcist. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, of course, The Exorcist. It's a great film.
Can you spin your head all the way around, Arthur?
No, I can't say that I can.
Ha!
Oh, yeah? Well, can you do this?
Apparently not.
Well, Artie, we're closing in on the end of our video today. This is the last chapter. Would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, I got this. Shut up. Hey, what's this last chapter about again?
This is the one that's like a hodgepodge of all different kinds of unusual stories.
Right, I got it. This is the one that, last time, you tried to impress people with your expansive vernacular and clever alliteration.
An odyssey of oddities, panoply of the paranormal, menagerie of the macabre,
Blah, 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 blah.
A smart dummy, are we? Well, what alliteration would you use then, huh?
Well, I would get right to the point and say, these next stories are some strange shit.
Our first stop in this chapter brings us to a quiet rural cemetery in Tennessee, Cave Creek Cemetery. In these grounds is an intriguing figure in local folklore, Felix Bush Brazil. His claim to fame is inscribed right here on his tombstone. In his latter years, Uncle Bush, as he was known, figured it was a shame that none of us will ever know what is said about us at our funeral. So on that note, he decided to throw his own preemptive funeral. He felled a big black walnut tree, constructed his own coffin out of it, and put plans in motion to put on a funerary party while he was still alive and could enjoy it. The plans were reported in a local newspaper, which was picked up by the Associated Press. Through the media buzz generated, it's estimated that some 8,000 to 12,000 people attended the funeral from some 14 states. At the service, Bush was seated in front of the coffin while hymns were sung and the pastor gave a sermon for the living corpse. He called the sermon the finest he had ever heard, and his was believed to be the largest funeral held in Tennessee at that time. The story would naturally inspire a film, Get Low, starring Robert Duvall as Felix. Our next story can be found in Willoughby Village Cemetery in Ohio. For 60 years, the young lady who had been hit and killed by a train on Christmas Eve near a boarding house in Willoughby was simply known as the Girl in Blue. No one knew who she was or how to find her loved ones. She wore a blue dress and shoes, coming to be known by locals as the Girl in Blue. Though no one knew her, 3,000 local residents attended her funeral. After an article ran commemorating the 60th anniversary of her death, researchers found documentation identifying her as Josephine Klimczak, after which this second headstone was added. For nearly 8 years, the man who rests here in this grave in Oak Grove Cemetery in Kentucky was simply known as the Paducah Plane Jumper. On September 30th, 1991, an unknown man attempted to catch a flight in a most unusual fashion. After failing to secure a ticket, he hopped the airport fence and ran onto the runway, making his way onto the wing of a departing commuter plane. After the plane took off, witnesses observed something falling from the plane. The body of the man was later discovered near a fence near the airport. Authorities were unable to identify him, so he was buried here as a John Doe. Years later, his stepmother identified him as 28-year-old Brian Duker. His grave initially only featured the top portion of this marker. The bottom portion, with his name, was added 10 years later after he was identified. This is Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood. Here in the grounds is the Portal of the Folded Wings, a shrine to aviation where notable figures in the field of aviation are laid to rest. With all the planes that take off and land daily over this cemetery, flying right over the Portal of the Folded Wings, I've sometimes wondered what would happen if a plane ever crashed here. Hang on, what's this I see over Amelia Earhart's cenotaph? Captain Dale Black, the only survivor of aviation's most ironic plane crash. On July 18, 1969, a plane crashed into this mausoleum, the Portal of the Folded Wings. The twin-engine plane crashed into the dome of the portal shortly after takeoff from the Burbank airport, having suffered engine failure. The pilot and co-pilot were killed, while Mr. Black survived with severe injuries. Wow, a plane crash into the portal of the Folded Wings, a shrine dedicated to and housing the honored dead of aviation history. That truly is the most tragically ironic plane crash in history. This isn't the only story of plane meets cemetery. Residents of Stockton in 1949 witnessed something they would never forget when 24-year-old Russell Higbee intentionally crashed his plane into the Stockton Rural Cemetery, just feet from the grave of his recently deceased wife. It was a sort of Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. The grief-stricken widower was mourning the loss of his 22-year-old wife, Beverly, who died in childbirth. They loved each other to death, and he couldn't go on without her. So on July 25, 1949, he took off in his small Cessna airplane and began circling and buzzing the town with numb recklessness. He then nosed down into a full-throttle dive aimed at the cemetery, slamming his plane feet from this spot, sending debris flying up to 1,500 feet and joining his beloved wife in the grave. Bruce Lee was the biggest martial arts star the big screen has ever seen. His strength, speed, and skill made him seem almost immortal, at least invincible. So it came as a tremendous shock to the world when he died from a cerebral edema at just 32. He died before the release of Enter the Dragon, and while Game of Death was still in production. After his death, filmmakers included footage of Bruce Lee's actual funeral, coffin, and corpse into the film. Taking a stroll through Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, you might notice some names inscribed into sections of the wall. That's because this wall was built from old tombstones, from graves that had either been moved or had their headstones replaced. Better late than never, eh, Amazon? I wonder what they ordered. When picturing the dead in our minds, we invariably envision a body lying supine. But don't tell that to Thomas Gooding here. He was entombed standing up, directly behind this engraved skeleton on the wall, in Norwich Cathedral here in England. Why standing up? The reason is he thought he could spring up into heaven more quickly on God's judgment day, if he were already standing. The inscription here reads, "All you that do this place pass by, remember death, for you must die. As you are now, even so was I. And as I am, so shall you be." Josh Ryan Evans was an actor with a form of dwarfism, remembered for playing the young Grinch and for his role as Timmy in the soap opera Passions. Josh was just 20 when he died during surgery for a heart condition. He died on August 5th, 2002. Curiously, this is the exact same date his character died on the show Passions, the broadcast ending shortly before Josh's death. Grover Krantz was an anthropologist, someone who studies human culture and behavior. Upon his death, Grover donated his body to science. Per his request, his bones were paired with the bones of one of his favorite dogs, an Irish wolfhound. The skeletons are on display at the Smithsonian, painstakingly re-articulated to match a photo of Grover and his dog in a loving embrace. Man's best friend, even beyond the grave. Our last stop of the day is in Brompton Cemetery in London. This is the tomb of Hannah Courtoy. The magnificent Egyptian-style mausoleum is one of the most impressive in the cemetery. Hannah was a wealthy socialite who had an interest in all things Egyptian and esoteric. Her obsession with Egyptology and the belief that perhaps the pharaohs held the secrets to time travel culminated in the design and creation of a time machine and teleportation portal. Where is said time machine? Why, it's her very tomb, designed with fellow enthusiast buried just feet away, Joseph Bonomi. She was entombed herein after passing away in 1849. But is she still there? Or did she travel to another time and place? Is Hannah's tomb here really a time portal? We may never know. We may never know. What is it, Artie? I'm trying to finish up this last shot.
Hey, Arthur! How's it going with the filming out there?
It's fine. What do you want?
Oh, nothing. Just wondering if you're at that time portal tomb yet.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, yeah? I dare you to go try it out.
What?
Go through the door of the tomb. I dare you. See if it really is a time portal.
Artie, don't be ridiculous. It's just a tall tale, okay? A fun story from the cemetery. This tomb isn't actually a time portal. You do realize that.
Then you have nothing to worry about.
Okay, fine. If it'll make you happy, I will take the time-traveling tomb for a test drive.
That's all that I ask.
All right. Here we go.
Arthur? Are you there? Hey, did it work? Hello? Arthur, where'd you go? Ha ha ha! It worked! I did it! I finally got rid of Arthur. Hollywood Graveyard is mine. Don't worry, folks. Arthur's not dead. He's just lost in time. He's a clever boy. Maybe he can find his way back. But just in case he doesn't, so he isn't forgotten, I've placed a cenotaph to Arthur Dark somewhere in a Los Angeles cemetery, in one of his favorite places. See if you can find it. If so, maybe, just maybe, Arthur can find his way back from the past. I'll give you a hint. It's not a ground plot, but a smaller above-ground cenotaph, niche-sized. It's also in a publicly accessible area. If you find it, let everyone know in the comments below. And that concludes this, our third exploration of the strange and unusual. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.